Hello, I'm Mal Grossinger. I work here at Gallaudet University as the Assistant Director for the Development Office. And I'm here to talk with you today about my two deaf children and where they will be going to attend school. It's been tough on me and my wife trying to decide exactly what we should do with our two kids. Should we send them to a school for the deaf or put them into a mainstream program? There's been some confusion about that. There is Kendall Demonstration Elementary School and Frederick Maryland School for the Deaf, so we have to choose between those two. So it's kind of difficult to decide where to put them. Now it's my turn to give this some consideration, as I know many other deaf parents have had to do as well, in terms of where they wanted to send their own kids. And I'll tell you why this has been such a point of concern for me. I used to work at Gallaudet as a recruiter through the enrollment office, and I have traveled throughout the country and had an opportunity to see a variety of different school settings, schools for the deaf, mainstream programs, and regular public schools. And you wouldn't believe the diversity and variance between these settings. And before I go into any more of that, I want to make it clear that I'm giving my own opinions. I'm not speaking for other parents. I'm telling you how I feel as a parent. And I recognize that there are other parents who have different opinions. So I'm only going to be sharing with you, again, how I feel about the different school settings, schools for the deaf, mainstream programs, and regular public schools. As I was saying then, I have given presentations to many students, those from mainstream schools, regular public schools, and schools for the deaf. And it's been an interesting opportunity for make some observations. The kids who generally come from mainstream schools are very passive. They tend to just take in the information and then don't go on to question or discuss what's been brought up in my presentations, as compared to those school students who go to schools for the deaf, who are much more aggressive and interested in making comments and discussing and asking questions. They want to get more information. Deaf students from regular public schools, I would say most of them don't even sign. And I often wondered how it is they manage to negotiate communication with their teachers. Obviously, an interpreter wouldn't do any good because, as I've said, they didn't sign. They could use their voices, but it seems to me that there are people who have hearing loss who do not understand information 100%, obviously, auditorily. Maybe they get 70 to 80% of that information. Maybe those people who have more in-depth hearing losses, maybe they're only able to get maybe 55 to 60% of the information. And I guess that a lot of it is a lot of guesswork or having to use both audition and speech reading to get the information, but I digress. So anyway, I've had a chance to see these students, and many of them oftentimes come to Gallaudet University as preparatory students or freshmen, and I've had a chance to talk with them in an effort to retain them here so that they could get through their 4 years here at Gallaudet. And oftentimes they would come to see specifically me, and I'm talking about schools of students who come from mainstream programs, and they've told me how really amazing it has been for them to have the communication at Gallaudet and wished that they had had that when they were in their own mainstream programs. They said it was wonderful to be able to sign in the classroom and to talk with the students outside the classroom about the homework or what topics had actually come up in class. That opportunity had never really been there for them in those mainstream public school settings. What would happen is the student, and again I'm talking about mainstream programs, would sit there and watch the interpreter. And by the time the deaf person asked a question, if he had one, it would be a little bit old because of the process time interpreters have. And what would happen is that the instructor would have to back up to answer the question, and that caused some embarrassment and depression for the student because they always seem to be a little bit behind informationally than the rest of the class. Then when the class was done, the interpreter would be off in a flash, and while the students were continuing their interaction with each other, it became difficult for the deaf student to negotiate participation in these groups. I mean, he would have perhaps some superficial communication with some of the students for those who could do a little bit of signing and maybe some finger spelling, but certainly it wouldn't have the depth that a student could have had with students who had been deaf all their lives and signing all their lives. And a lot of these kids also come from homes where they have hearing parents, so they can't even really communicate very well there. They're also limited and only able to communicate with perhaps a very few choice peers. This is not the case in schools for the deaf. There's so much more interaction and signing among everybody. Class discussions can happen in the classroom. People can begin building on whatever knowledge they have. They can get together and study and whatnot. As for myself, I went to a school for the deaf as well as having deaf parents. So deafness has certainly not been anything new to me. When I came to Gallaudet, and I saw everyone signing, the professors and whatnot. There was nothing particularly surprising to me about that. Now, I did have a few friends who lived with hearing families, and that was quite a situation at times. I'd watch their parents signing, and their parents could sign, and it was good to watch, but sometimes the parents would get so involved in what they were talking about that they would stop signing to go on to whatever the topic was. And my friend would just simply say, oh, I'm used to that happening. My parents do that all the time. Well, I didn't care for that, and it really struck me in a very negative way. I've never had such an experience. It's extremely important for a child to be able to watch what their parents learn from. After all, those are their initial role models. So even though some hearing parents do sign, there can still be certain difficulties inherent. So when I graduated from Gallaudet and then did my recruitment work, I went on to graduate school. The problem was Gallaudet didn't really offer the program I wanted in educational administration. Well, let me qualify that. They had it on a doctoral level, but not on a master's level, which is where I wanted it. So I had to take the majority of my courses at American University. So now I became the one deaf person in a classroom with an interpreter. And I cannot tell you how incredibly difficult that situation was. I don't mean in terms of the course content. I'm talking about such things as not being able to study with the other students for a test. I was so spoiled at Gallaudet because I was always used to sharing what I learned with students and, passing notes to each other to study and be able to have rap sessions to discuss the information. I didn't have that at American University. The professor would give us a project where 2 or 3 of us would have to get together outside of the class to make a report. And it would be very difficult, I being the only deaf person in the group, because they only had an interpreter for the classroom, so we'd have to contact American University's Office of Special Services to obtain an interpreter for the after-class time that I got together with people. And then there was always having to set up the day and the time and trying to fit everyone's schedule together, and also then let the interpreter know. And I always felt like I was the one kind of making the problem here. Nobody could just spontaneously get together because everyone felt like they were tied down to my schedule. And the interpreter would come and only be here for maybe 1 or 2 hours. That was a problem if our conversations went on for, 3 hours or more. Then you have to pay the interpreter more. Of course, that didn't come out of my own pocket. That always came out of the special services. And even if we could get an interpreter who wanted to stay, a lot of times the problem was that they had a schedule that they had to follow, so they didn't really have the 3 hours to give either. So that was very difficult and very much a hassle. Probably the worst part, though, for me of the whole experience was that I had to study for my comprehensive examinations alone. And the reason that that was kind of a drag for me is that because at Gallaudet, usually they have 7 or 8 students who would get together when it came time for the comprehensive exams. So you'd have half the group maybe handle half of the comp questions and the other half deal with the other half of the comp questions. I didn't have that option at the American University. I did have one student who lent me their notes, or rather the answers to the comp questions that might appear on the actual test, and I had a hard time reading their handwriting. I got to talk with them a little bit, but not much. Again, the problem with the interpreter. I did pass my comprehensive examinations, but that's just a really, really difficult thing to have gone through. And then I think about kids who are 3 and 4 years old going through the same thing that I did in my graduate program, and that's just entirely too tough. So here I am at the present with my own 2 deaf children, and I have decided that my deaf kids are not going to a mainstream program. I just cannot do that. I know that there's a downside to putting them into a school for the deaf. I know sometimes that the courses such as math and English may be a little bit slower in their pace than they ought to be, because some of the kids have not had an opportunity to learn at home like some of the others have, because many of them have hearing parents, so they haven't really had exposure to language yet before they come into school. My kids, of course, had exposure to language while they were home, so that by the time they were 4 years old, they were ready to go into school for full time, and they already had a fully developed language. But what happens is that some of the other kids, because they're not as advanced linguistically, sometimes pull the class behind. Now, in mainstream programs, the kids have to go in there sometimes because everyone's linguistic level is on par because they've learned that since birth on. So that's not always so in the mix of students who go to schools for the deaf. So I think that it's my responsibility to get behind the school and have them pick up the pace a little bit, pick up their standards, so that they give the students who are able greater challenges. A lot of students think that school's supposed to be real easy and one huge playground. I don't want that for my kids. I want it to be a real challenge for them. I want them to have a lot of homework, and I want them to have to read a lot. You know, because there's a lot of hearing kids when they go to public schools do that kind of work. I don't see that happening in schools for the deaf. And I know that because I have a friend who has a hearing kid who's already got some homework. They have to go to the library, if you can imagine. That's a required assignment for them. But at the Kendall school, there's no such requirement. At least I haven't heard about it. I don't know if maybe it's some sort of age-appropriate thing because he is only 4 years old, my child, and the other child I was talking about in the public school is 5 years old. So maybe what I need to do is just be a little bit more patient. But when my son turns 5, I expect the kind of work I see going on in the public school with this hearing kid to be going on with my kid, too. So as I said, it's my job to kind of get behind the school and see that these things are going on. But there's also an upside to putting them into a school for the deaf. They have the interaction with other students. They can build self-confidence. And you got to know that only a quarter of the information is learned in the classroom anyway. 3/4 of it comes outside the classroom. That's why communication at all times is so important. So I think that a quarter of the information is not all that there is. And I'll give you my honest opinion. The reason that I picked Kendall School as the place I wanted to send my kids is because they have an updated curriculum that's nicely computerized. Now, the Frederick School in Maryland is a very good school. I don't mean to demean it. But if you look at the kids who are 3, 4, and 5 at Kendall and compare them to what's going on at the Frederick School for the Deaf, I found that they're still using the methods and strategies and curriculum that they were using when I was 5 and 6 years old. Kendall has certainly come a long way from that. They've started computerizing, and I recognize that they have had the wherewithal to keep up technologically with these kinds of things. Even in speech courses that they may have for maybe 15 minutes, they're really fun for the kids. For example, they may try to get the kids to sustain the sound for M. And on computer, what they do is they show this horse that is racing towards a finish line, and as long as the kid sustains the M, then it gets the horse to that finish line. Now, the Maryland School for the Deaf doesn't have anything like that. They're still using the old feather and handkerchief method of blowing to teach speech. And compared to the technology that's at Kendall, certainly that would be a better choice. And I recognize that Frederick School just doesn't have the kind of funding that Kendall does for those kinds of things and to buy that kind of equipment. So anyway, I think that's what tilted the balance in favor of me putting my kids in that school. Now, when my kids get to be 8, 9, and 10 years old, I wonder what's going to happen with them. I hope that they'll choose to remain in schools for the deaf. But I have heard from other parents who also have deaf kids that sometimes they have trouble keeping the kids in their school because their level gets so advanced, like at Kendall, that they can't really give to those kids what they really need. For example, there are some students, you'll say 20% of the kids are all pretty much, out of 20 kids, you'll say maybe most of them are on par, and then maybe 2 or 3 are particularly gifted. And there's no program to really be for those 2 or 3 kids who are particularly gifted. They get put in with the regular students, and since there is no place, oftentimes they're put into a mainstream program, and I think that we need to look for another option other than that. I feel that I, as well as other parents who feel that there is a similar problem, need to join together to set up a program for those kinds of students who are perhaps a little more gifted and above the norm. But the problem, of course, that comes up is the budget limitations and how we're going to set up this program. Perhaps what we can do is look at some programs that really aren't as useful in the school and perhaps use the funds from that to channel into setting up some sort of program for gifted students. At the current time, there's no way to fund that. So that's something that we do have to try and overcome. But I would say that overall, again, speaking for myself and my wife, I think that sending our kids to the Kendall Demonstration Elementary School was the right decision because of my own experiences and also because of, incidentally, my wife went to public schools until she was high school age, and then she went into a school for the deaf. Her life experiences in public schools were horrendous. It was very hard on her, and she was unhappy in the extreme. And when she went into the school for the deaf, she said that it was just the most important difference in her life, and she wished she'd had that all of her life. So both of us feel that we have made the right decision, and that's how we came to our decision. And I know that there are other parents, though, who feel that it would be better to send their kids to mainstream programs, and they have a very different opinion. I think what would be neat to do in the future is maybe to get together and have a bull session where we can kind of try and figure out where the other one's coming from. And I think that this could set up a nice uh, place from which administrators, school administrators, teachers can find the best sort of educational materials, and then perhaps can assist those parents who are not as certain about where to put their kids, where might be the best choices for them.